Hello everyone and welcome to Autistic Changeling. Today I want to talk about functioning labels because I mentioned them in my last video and said I would make a video about them, so now I'm doing that. So functioning labels are basically when you say someone is high functioning or low functioning, but they're not limited just to those phrases. Other types of wording that people use that imply the same things as functioning labels are mildly autistic or severely autistic, or just a little on the spectrum, and things like that. Anything that implies a degree of being autistic on a spectrum of from being not a person to basically not disabled, which is why functioning labels are frowned upon by a lot of autistic people, because they basically put you on a scale from basically a normal person like the rest of us, or high functioning, to not really a person and not able to do anything at all, or low functioning. And you know, that's pretty harmful as a way of looking at people. And also, I feel like a lot of the time this comes from a misunderstanding of what spectrum means as far as autism goes. Autistic people can have a wide variety of traits and still be autistic. And there's a wide variety of ways which autistic people can present. A really common thing is for both a trait and its opposite to be autistic traits, because in my experience, autistic people tend to present at either end of the extremes. So both being hypersensitive to sound, for example, and finding minor noises more frustrating than a non-autistic person would find them, and being hyposensitive and seeking out noises that are louder than most people would be comfortable with are autistic traits. And this applies to a wide variety of other areas as well. Both low empathy and high empathy are more common in autistics than in the general population. I can't think of any other examples off the top of my head, but they're out there. And you know, that wide range of how being autistic can present, you know, either ends of the extremes, or even just a variety of different types of special interests and sensory sensitivities can manifest in a wide variety of ways, different types of ways of interacting with people. You know, they're all autistic ways, but they're different, and autistic people present across a spectrum, but it's not a spectrum of not autistic to autistic. It's a spectrum of, it's not a spectrum with two ends. It's like a circle, and where you are on the circle doesn't make you more or less autistic. It just affects how your autisticness presents itself. There's been some good graphics about this. I'll see if I can find them and link them in the description. If there's no links in the description, that means I couldn't find them. So that's one thing to consider. Another aspect is that from a practical perspective, when people use functioning labels, they often use them to hurt autistic people. You know, if someone says that you're high functioning, it's supposed to be a compliment, but in practicality, it often means that they're expecting you to not be disabled at all. If someone says high functioning, what they're saying is that, often because you can talk, because a lot of the time people use these labels based on how verbal someone is, which is another issue. But often it means that because you can talk and you sounded reasonably eloquent, they're assuming that you're not going to have meltdowns, you're not going to be socially awkward in ways that are more noticeable than just being a little awkward. There's like a line past which, if you show an autistic behavior, they get confused. And that's one of the problems with being seen as high functioning, because people use it as a way to say that you're almost a real person. And when someone is seen as low functioning, it means that anything they might be good at, anything that they might have to offer, just the fact that they're a person and that they deserve basic respect and, you know, basic rights to self-determination, gets taken away and not viewed because they're severely autistic. And, you know, that's pretty detrimental, because either way it's being used to wield power against the autistic people by saying that you know them better than they know themselves. So that's an issue with other people using functioning labels on autistic people without their permission. Also, functioning labels are, like I mentioned, they're poorly defined. A lot of the time people will use them based solely on whether or not someone can speak, which seems highly inaccurate because that's one trait. That is one trait, uno. It doesn't mean anything to anything else, and it's not consistently used like that either. Sometimes people will use it on whether or not you can speak. Sometimes people will use it based on whether or not you have meltdowns, or based on whether or not your special interest is something useful to them, or based on a general impression of how smart they think you are at this moment in time. And these things can all fluctuate. Someone can be verbal one day and not verbal another day. I could meet the criteria that I just listed for being high functioning because I can talk, and then fail it because I have meltdowns. It doesn't mean anything, and someone's ability to do something fluctuate from day to day. And all of these things mean that I don't think functioning labels are useful. I don't think that they help autistic people, and I think that a lot of the time they can be used to hurt and to dismiss us. I would recommend that if you're going to talk about something, instead of saying that a person is high functioning or low functioning, think about what you actually want to say. If you're trying to say that someone you know needs accommodations for a specific thing, then say that. If you're trying to say that someone needs alternative communication, or that someone needs a person to help them doing specific tasks, or that someone doesn't need those accommodations, say that. Say what specifically you're going to say. And if you think about it and you realize that you're not really trying to say anything about the autistic person other than that you think they seem like a real person or like not an autistic person, then maybe consider why you felt that. And maybe consider that a lot of autistic people intentionally try not to seem autistic because it makes people like us more. And maybe think about how that's kind of screwy. Now, to talk more about some personal experiences, I've been called high functioning by a couple of people, or, things similar to that, maybe not specifically that phrase. I believe I mentioned in my last video the therapist who called me high functioning and compared me to her nephew. Now, that specifically is a situation which does happen a lot, where someone who knows an autistic person, often a child, will talk to an autistic adult and say, "You're high functioning, not like my child. Therefore, the things that you say aren't relevant to me." And there are two main issues with this from my perspective. One, I'm an adult. Your child is a child. I am not going to be like your child because I am older than your child. Autistic adults are adults. Autistic children are not adults. Autistic children will change when they become adults because autistic people do change and develop over time. We are not static. We change and grow like any other person, and therefore I am not going to be like your child because I am an adult. But, number two, you're not autistic. The fictional person I'm talking to here is not autistic. There are autistic people with autistic children. That is a different situation because they are not often the ones who say, "You're high functioning, you're a child." That doesn't usually happen when you're talking to an actual autistic person talking about their child. So this fictional person is not autistic, and I am. That means that no matter what, I am probably going to have more personal experience and more in common as far as autistic traits go with their child than they do. So if they're saying, obviously, if they're the parent, then they'll know more about their child than I will. I won't know anything about someone's child just by knowing their child is autistic. But if they're trying to say that my words don't mean anything because I'm high functioning, then their words need to be considered from the fact that they're not autistic at all. And often that is not recognized when you're talking about this kind of thing. So that's something that does frustrate me. And I've had people also say that, they don't think I'm really autistic based only on the fact that I talk. I think those people just aren't really super familiar with autism and how autistic people represent, honestly. So there's not much to say there. I think those people just don't know a great deal about autistic people. And last, I want to address autistic people who do use functioning labels for themselves. I think there's several situations in which you'll see an autistic person using a functioning label to describe themselves. The first situation is where someone uses a functioning label to say that, you know, they're autistic, but maybe they've been told that they're not really autistic, and they've been told that frequently enough that they don't feel comfortable just saying I'm autistic, and they feel like they have to qualify it somehow, because otherwise they're afraid that they're going to be shot down. The second situation is where someone is using a functioning label, often high functioning, to say that they're not like those other autistics. And this situation, I think, comes from internalized ableism a lot of the time, where someone has internalized the idea that being autistic is bad, and they don't think they're bad. They think they're a real person. So they must be high functioning because they're a person, and in their mind they've been told that autistic people are not people. And this often comes as a result of facing ableism and then internalizing that into your worldview. And I think those are the two main situations in which you'll see autistic people using functioning labels, but it's also worth noting that if an autistic person was diagnosed specifically using a functioning label, they might continue to use that when describing themselves, especially if they're not familiar with the autistic community and haven't thought a great deal about functioning labels and what they mean, and hasn't considered that they might be harmful. The person might still continue to use them because that's how it was told to them. So I think that covers a lot. I do want to mention also some great articles that I've seen talking about functioning labels that describe the same person in two paragraphs. The first, which makes them seem high functioning, and the second, which makes them seem low functioning. And it's the same person, just described from two different perspectives. The first paragraph highlighting their strengths, and the second highlighting their weaknesses. And I think that's a pretty great way to show how not useful functioning labels can be, because, you know, they don't say anything inherent about a person. They don't say anything, really, other than how you think about them. I've seen some alternatives proposed, but honestly, I think the best policy is just to say what you mean. So that wraps this up. If you have any questions, or if there's anything you'd like to see in a future video, please let me know in the comments, and have a great day.